Okay, quick music disclaimer here. I do not own the rights to this music, which belongs to the rightful owner, who is the intoxicating mind of Dr. Frankenstein. So he made my intro and my outro, and I hope you guys enjoy. Check them out on Spotify and YouTube, and no copyright infringement is intended. Have a good day.
A clear choice of good versus evil, of right versus wrong.
Twisted Tales.
Investigators say Keyes is a textbook serial killer. Like other famous killers in the past, he took pleasure in the act of taking a life.
He talked about the rush that he got out of it, the adrenaline and kind of the high from doing it. And I think, unfortunately, I think he enjoyed what he was doing.
Welcome back to Twisted Tales. So my next tale, it's going to be a little challenging, I'm not going to lie. So this one's a viewer request, and we're going to talk about serial killer Israel Keyes. Now, you might ask what I can do that hasn't been done a million times over in other podcasts. Well, there's a lot of info on this guy, and I'm going to try to give it to you best I can. Because I know, there's a lot of people, you can skim through Google or Wikipedia, right? And you can just find out the basic shit. But what I want to do is give you the best known knowledge about this guy. And I'm going to try to do that, because I got to be up to par on this one. So, give me a couple moments here, and then I guess we'll get to enjoy this episode together. So my next episode will be episode number 62. It'll be about serial killer Israel Keyes. So hang on. Alright. Now, I know I've been putting this one off for a bit, but between work, life, kids, sleeping issues, everything else, you just continue on and do your shit, right? So, I'm going to lay this one all out for you guys. And here we go. Now, who is Israel Keyes? Now, he's a man who traveled all over America in order to hunt and prey on his victims. He's definitely one of the most standalone serial killers, like I previously mentioned. And not overly a household name, but he stands alone on his own pedestal on this one. It's a really interesting case. Keyes was born January 7th, 1978. He was an American serial killer, but he did dabble into a lot of other criminal activities. You know, shit like kidnapping, arson, bank robbing, and crimes of a sexual nature. Now, his early days began in Richmond, Utah. He was born to Heidi and John Jeffrey Keyes. The Keyes were a very large family. Israel was the second of 10 children born to the family. Now, his mother and father were members of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This was the Torrance, California chapter. Now, in turn, Keyes and his other siblings had been homeschooled and taught Christian beliefs. Now, Keyes' dad, he packed everybody up, and he moved the family to an isolated remote plot of land after they left the Fundamentalist Church. Now, this would be located north of Colville, Washington, in Stevens County. Now, this would be back around when Israel was about a 5-year-old boy. Now, the father, Jeffrey Keyes, he was a man of strong beliefs. He also had a mistrust for the government, kind of like we all do, and he wasn't much for modern medicine. Now, the 10 children of the family, they were all birthed at home without any medical assistance. And the move had socially isolated the family. The off-the-grid living made them go without the everyday modern technologies that we often take for granted, like electricity and running water. So the family settled into Colville pretty well. But life in a one-room cabin with no power or water wasn't without its charm. The cabin was located on Rocky Creek Road, and they attended a church, and this church was called, nicknamed, The Ark. So it was kind of like an Amish church-like environment, but it was more for teachings of racist beliefs. Now, there, they would meet their new neighbors and family. This was also a known serial killer, Chevy Keogh. So I guess, small world. And we'll backtrack to that soon enough. So, the rules of the church, they kind of had like a militia-like feeling, and Keyes was pretty much everything about that. But everything was starting to get to him. The church, the small living quarters, and for years, some of the family would have to sleep in a tent due to the small commodities of the family cabin. So, in order to survive, the family would hunt their food, they'd chop firewood, just shit they did living off the grid. They'd sometimes work on surrounding local farms just to support the family. Now, in his youth, Keyes found ways to keep occupied. Shooting houses with his trusty BB gun, doing breaking and enterings, and he did those with other kids. But those other kids would soon steer clear of him. It was due to his infatuation with killing animals. Now, Keyes had acquired several stolen guns over time too, because he sold stolen goods. Now, he stole some guns from a neighbor's residence, and he thought he kept them in a good spot. But his parents discovered them, and they forced him to return the guns and make apologies to the neighbor. But the kid also always had stolen goods available, because he sold them to the local adults around town. And it seemed as he grew into adolescence, symptoms associated with psychopathy began to take hold of Keyes, to the point where he began to torture small animals. Now, over time, he began to feel ostracized by the other children in the community, because the kids felt a little uneasy around his presence. So this would only add to his discomfort, because eventually he would just start shooting cats and skinning deer alive just to show off for his so-called friends. And it was weird because even his home life was strict. Maybe that was a way for Keyes to act out. I mean, under his father's roof, it was just full tilt religion. Because the guy wasn't even allowed to play any music, watch any movies. And in his teen years, he ended up dropping his Christian faith and began dabbling in Satanism. So I'll fast forward to July 9th, 1988. Now, Keyes joined the United States Army in the state of New York. So he served as a specialist in Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, stationed at Fort Lewis and Fort Hood, also Sinai, Egypt. Now, he befriended many soldiers from over that way, and Keyes recalls in an interview with police that he told one of the soldiers from over there that he would like to kill him. Now, at Fort Lewis, Keyes served as a mortar team in the 1st Battalion, 5th Infantry, 25th Infantry Division. Now, Army friends of his noticed that he did keep to himself a lot, and he was a relatively quiet man, but he did drink heavily on Wild Turkey bourbon, because that was just his favorite drink, right? Mine was vodka, so I get that. Now, this kind of ended up cutting his Army career a little short, because he got pulled over and arrested for drunk driving in Thurston County. A plea agreement was made, and he was fined $350. And the guy's military career was, perfect. And his service as a gunner and assistant gunner from December 1998 to July 2001, he got awarded an Army Achievement Medal. Now, after this, he was honorably discharged, and Keyes relocated to Nia Bay, Washington. And then in 2007, Keyes started up a construction business in Alaska called Keyes Construction. It was located at 134 West 12th Avenue in Anchorage, Alaska. Now, he gave himself job titles that he proclaimed upon himself, like contractor and construction worker, shit like that. Now, in a police interview after apprehension, police asked Keyes if the murder started after his discharge from the army, and he replied with, "Yeah, Nia Bay, a boring town." Now, Nia Bay, Washington, lays across the Canada-U.S. border from British Columbia. And, like, yeah, it was just a small, quiet town, so I guess Keyes got bored. So, I mean, he had to find ways to occupy his time. And, unfortunately, this was like plotting and planning out his murders. Now, as he relocated to Nia Bay, Keyes started dating a few girlfriends off and on. Now, one of these women, of whom he would have a child with, a daughter. Now, the girlfriend was one Tammy Hawkins. She was actually 9 years older than Keyes, being born in 1969. Now, Tammy's father was an African American, and his mother was Native American from the Makah tribe. Now, Tammy had also come from a broken home. Her mom was an alcoholic, and her father wasn't around much. Now, around the age of 16, Tammy also had issues with the bottle. Now, she found out rather quickly that she became addicted, so she took measures to go to Alcoholics Anonymous, and she moved to Tacoma, off the reservation. Now, good for her for realizing, like, her own faults and shit. Like, AA can help a lot of people, myself included. Like, everybody struggles with this shit. That's why there's helps and programs out there, folks. So, if you're ever struggling with anything, you know, you can always look something up or get the help you need, right? Now, Tammy one day was looking over a newspaper, and she had an ad catch her eye. Now, this was an ad for a local chat room, kind of like for online dating. So, she decided to give it a go. Shortly after, she received a message from Keyes, but he accidentally messaged her thinking it was somebody else. So she returned a message just to correct him, you know, telling him of what he'd done, and the two eventually hit it off. So they continued on chatting a little bit more. And over time, the two would just eventually move up to talking on the phone for hours. And eventually they decided to meet in person at a Mexican restaurant. Now, she remembers not being physically attracted to him at first, as he was kind of like just a thin man and a tad awkward, if you will. So over time, the two evolved into deeper, more meaningful conversations, and finding out that they had a little bit more in common than what they thought. So the sexual tension grew quickly between them, and things turned sexual rather quickly, using protection more often than not, except for one night, kind of before Keyes was heading back to his army duties. So, as he was back, she telephoned him to tell him the news of her pregnancy. Kind of scared and nervous at first, Keyes asked her for an abortion, and that probably sent the ship sinking, because Tammy refused to do that, and she advised him to go on with his life, and that she wouldn't even bother with any news of the baby. So, obviously pissed off because of Key's reaction, because the phone call was supposed to be, you know, a newfound blessing, but it seems that he went by it with the wrong wording, right? So, they didn't talk for a little bit after this. A little while after, Keyes had time to reflect on the failed phone call and possible relationship. Now, once he was discharged from the army, he ended up tracking Tammy down with promises of wanting to be with her and to be a part of his new daughter's life, Sarah. Now, Tammy was happy about all of this, and the two moved to the Makah reservation to settle into a domesticated lifestyle. Now, Keyes did the everyday thing. He made breakfast, he cleaned up, he got his daughter ready for like preschool and daycare, all the normal everyday shit. But Tammy, she wasn't feeling the best. Now, she ended up having to have a hysterectomy operation and was prescribed a pain medication. Shortly after this, Tammy was involved in a car accident, so she was prescribed more pain medication. So she would soon establish a pain med addiction. But as a result of this, her and Keyes started to slowly grow apart because of her addiction, even though Keyes himself had a drinking problem. The two split up in 2007, and Keyes told her that he was seeing somebody else, and he would be soon moving up to Anchorage, Alaska. Now, he'd take their daughter up there to move up there with him, but this began a huge custody battle. But it didn't really matter much, as Keyes had Sarah most of the time after he got settled up there. With city life out of the way, Keyes could now start spending time up in the mountains. Mostly, Alaska was just mostly forest area anyway. And he still ran his business and portrayed his portrayal of the everyday man. Keyes would be behind the scenes plotting and scheming. So he started to look up, like, towns with little to no crime rate, looking at how many roads came in and out of town, hotels, traffic tens, shit like that. Just stuff like if anything went down, he could plan his escape. And then he would pick somebody to murder in that town. Now, he had a very meticulous and organized approach to this. He would travel to various locations throughout his years and bury caches of murder weapons and equipment in different towns. Now, he would plan his murder when he traveled back to that city, and sometimes this would take years. That's how into it Keyes was, that he planned everything out way beforehand. And FBI released a timeline of Keyes' travels after his arrest, and this detailed nearly 36 trips between the years of 2004 and 2012. Mostly only detailing the U.S. region, but spanned the entire country. Hawaii for one, Canada and Mexico are a few others. Now, these trips cost money, and although Keyes ran a successful business and had still been receiving his army pay, this was more than enough to fund his criminal activities. Instead, he resorted to robbing banks. Later, stated by him that it wasn't a money thing, but strictly for the adrenaline high that came along with it. It's also well known that he did kill people prior to moving to Alaska. Like, while in Washington State, Keyes began to fear that if he continued killing here, it would draw the attention to people in the vicinity, and this is why he decided to start killing out of state. And, besides his new girlfriend and stuff, I mean, the cold wilderness of Alaska would soon serve as a dark purpose for him, right? And the murders Keyes did before Alaska, before fearing that the heat would come down, victims like the girl that he raped and let go. And in a police interview, Keyes admitted to crimes from the 1990s, saying that he killed 4 people while living in Washington State. Now, these claims are still being backed up and looked into by the police and FBI. They're just trying to pinpoint the locations, mostly because he lived in several places in the state from 1990 to about 2008.
A serial killer kidnapped and murdered an Essex Junction couple. Bill and Lorraine Currier were last seen at their home on June 8, 2011. Their bodies were never found. Authorities say Israel Keyes traveled the country for years, killing strangers. He confessed to 3 murders, the Curriers and a woman from Alaska, but investigators believe he killed 11 people.
Now, all these crimes are just, stuff from his early days, before he moved to Alaska, and these are what he said in police interrogation that he confessed to, and that police are still trying to link together to try to convict him for. Even in his army days back from 1998 to 2001, when he lived in Colville, in the eastern Washington area, even the reservation community of Nia Bay, Keyes didn't have a felony record, and it was just the one time that he was cited for the drunk driving or whatever. Now, police did look at other crimes and assaults in the area just to try to connect them to Keyes, and he did confess to 1 murder in New York State, And police are still trying to look into like the sex, the age, the identity of the victim. And they do regard the confession by Keyes to be credible. Mainly because like Keyes had ties to New York around that time, like owning 10 acres of land in the town of Constable, and that contained a rundown cabin. And he talked about once burglarizing a home down in Texas and then setting it on fire. So, like, these could be true. Like, they could also be claims to brighten up his notoriety. And, like, these are some of the things that he did in his early years. Like, the army days before moving to Alaska shit, right? But there's also another murder that he did confess to. The killing of a couple, Bill and Lorraine Courier. Now, I'll play a clip on that here in just a second here. So let's talk a little bit about these two. Now, Bill and Lorraine, the couple stayed at home mostly, like they were just living in their quiet Essex home in Vermont. They had some pets, like most people do. Now, on June 11th, the couple had a real bad encounter with that of a serial killer, Israel Keyes. Now, he chose their home totally at random. I mean, they were a great couple, friendly, peaceful, and good-willed. And all they did was just come into encounter with Keyes' random murder plot shit. Like, Keyes was actually driving through Burlington at this time, and there was a murder kit that was in the area. Keyes, he knew that. And, because he hid that here some years before. And that kit had held such things as zip ties, ammo, guns, silencers, Drano, and duct tape. All these contents were located in a 5-gallon pail.
Officials say Keyes traveled to Vermont 18 months ago planning to kidnap and murder someone at random. They say he was looking for a house with an attached garage and no security, apparently to make it easier to get away with the crime. Keyes told authorities in Alaska he tied up the Couriers, then took them to an abandoned farmhouse where he shot Bill Courier when he became too hard to control. Lorraine Courier briefly escaped, prosecutors say, and Keyes chased her down, sexually assaulted her, then strangled her to death.
Though confronted with death, Bill and Lorraine Courier showed extraordinary bravery and courage and extreme dedication and love to each other. They fought to the end.
Donovan said Keyes stashed the bodies in garbage bags, but the Courier's remains were never found, despite an extensive landfill search earlier this year. The Essex police chief read a note from the victims' relatives.
Thank you to our friends, co-workers, and strangers who have stood by us through this difficult time.
While Vermont officials consider the Courier case closed, they noted that investigations are ongoing in several other murders. Israel Keyes reportedly confessed to killing 4 people in Washington state, as well as 1 in New York state. He was jailed on another crime, the murder of a coffee shop worker in Anchorage, Alaska. The family's statement said they are now beginning a new chapter of healing, a sentiment shared around the Courier's town.
I hope that the community can come to some kind of closure.
In Essex, Vermont, Jack Thurston, NECN.
Once Keyes had dug up his little murder kit, he came upon the Courier's place of residence. This was a little after midnight after he was out for a walk away from his hotel. He cut the phone line and he broke into the couple's attached garage. He headed inside the house through the kitchen and he made his way up to the couple's bedroom. He found the couple asleep. Now, Bill would be 50 years old, and Lorraine is 55. They awoke to Keyes dressed to the nines in all black, wearing a headlamp, and had a gun in his hand. He used the zip ties that he acquired from his burial kit, and then tied the two up. He began throwing questions at them, like, do you have a safe, or do you have any weapons in the home? And he also demanded their ATM cards. Lorraine did have a gun for protection, but Keyes eventually took it off her. He also took their cell phones. He gathered up the couple, and he forced them into their own vehicle. And then he took them somewhere quiet. It was actually an abandoned house that he had seen earlier, that he was scoping out. Once Keyes dug up his little 5-gallon pail kit, he came up on the Courier's place of residence. This was a little after midnight, after he walked from his hotel room. He cut the phone line and broke in through the couple's attached garage. He headed inside the house, and he entered through the kitchen. He made his way to the couple's bedroom, and he found the couple asleep. Bill, a 50-year-old man, and Lorraine, a 55-year-old woman. They awoke to Keyes standing in the front of them, dressed all in black. He wore a headlamp, and he had a gun in his hand. He used the zip ties that he acquired from his burial kit, and he tied the two up and began questioning them about the details of their home, like whether they had a safe or not, or if they had any weapons in the home, and he demanded their ATM cards. Now, Lorraine had a gun for protection, which Keyes took off her. He also took along their cell phones. So he gathered up the couple, and he forced them into their own vehicle, and he went to take them somewhere quiet, kind of like the abandoned house that he'd seen earlier that he scoped out. Once at the abandoned property, he quickly tied Bill to a stool in the basement and left Lorraine in the vehicle. Upon returning to the vehicle after he tied Bill up, he noticed that Lorraine had escaped from the front seat and was currently running towards the main road. Seeing this, he ended up chasing after her. He tackled her to the ground, and he dragged her back into the abandoned property. He dragged her up to the bedroom, and he began tying her arms and legs up to the bed. Bill heard the commotion and yelled, "Where's my wife? Where's my wife?" Now, Keyes ventured down to the basement to check on him. He noticed that he was about halfway free, so this pissed Keyes off because of the two near escapes, and Keyes did things in a particular way. So Keyes lost control. He picked up a nearby shovel and started hitting Bill with it repeatedly. Now, before he pulled out a gun, he shot Bill multiple times with a 10-22 Ruger Charger. Now, Keyes headed upstairs after this, and he began cutting Lorraine's clothes off with a knife. He began to sexually assault her twice. During the attack, he strangled her until she lost consciousness. Now, as if this sick, twisted ordeal wasn't enough to bear already, Keyes dragged her down to the basement so she could see the body of her dead husband. He sat her down on a nearby bench and began to strangle her from behind. Now, first he used a rope, but that didn't overly work. She was too tough. He tried zip ties, and to no avail. And then he just continued on doing it until he killed her. Now, this couple, they did all they could, and they almost escaped this lunatic. They were either going to help one another or go get help, and it's uncertain what the plan of action would have been. Even when confronted with death, the couple went above and beyond. They had devotion and dedication to one another, and they pretty much fought until the bitter end. And it sucks that it wasn't enough, and they were both killed just at a fucking deadly game by a random sadistic serial killer. Shortly after the couple were dead, he started to remove their restraints. He poured Drano on their bodies, as this would speed up the decomposition process. He wrapped the bodies up in garbage bags, and he dragged them over to a corner of the farm basement, and he covered them with pieces of debris that he found throughout the farmhouse. Now, Keyes was originally going to set the house on fire, but time wasn't a factor. People around would see the flames as it was early morning, and even during his trip back home, Keyes didn't even think of what he just did. He pretty much just went about his day. He did visit the National Monument Forest in New Hampshire, and he disposed of the items that he took from the house. Now, he placed these items in a suitcase that he had, and he set them on fire. He also dumped the pistol that he used to murder Bill and Lorraine, some other tools that he used to orchestrate things, and he dumped these in New York City before he returned to Anchorage. But he slightly rushed this, because he actually left some of the shell casings on the basement of the floor of the farmhouse. And funny thing is, unbeknownst to him, the farmhouse was demolished sometime later, and along with the debris, everything was chipped off, and this was sent to a local landfill in October or November of that year. Now, an FBI team had scoured the landfill in northern Vermont. They spent months making the attempts to locate the couple's bodies. but nothing ever turned up, and the remains were never found. At one point, Keyes did return to Vermont, and he followed the murder case through the TV. And this was also, he read some stories in the Vermont press as well. Now, Bill had worked at an animal care technician, so he took care of animals or whatever. Now, this was at the University of Vermont, and Lorraine worked at Fletcher Allen Healthcare. Police had even checked out the couple's bank statements and their bank account activity, but everything was gone unused. A neighbor named Edwin Shipley, he lived 2 houses down from the Couriers, and he recalls changing small talk with Bill over the years, describing him as a quiet fella, but friendly enough. Wendy James, a high school teacher who lived near the Couriers, says the couple's disappearance is unsettling, and she remembers the couple celebrated the holidays with lots of decorations. And in a quiet neighborhood like that, nothing like this usually happens. And the last time anyone's seen the couple alive were when they left their jobs on June 8th, 2011. And there's also a couple incidents, and other crimes that police think that he's a suspect in. Now, one of those cases is Deborah Feldman, a 48-year-old prostitute who struggled with substance abuse. Her body has never been recovered, although police found frequent search histories about her and the case on Israel Keyes' computer. This was before he was arrested for his other crimes. Now, she was last seen at her apartment in Hackensack, New Jersey in 2009. When federal agents showed pictures of her image to Keyes while he was in custody, he just hesitated a moment and he replied with, "I don't want to talk about her yet." Police suspect that Keyes buried her body near Tupper Lake, New York. Now, Tupper Lake has a population of about 5,147 people as of 2020. Police also suspect Keyes in the death of a 12-year-old girl from Colville. This was after she'd been reported missing, and the remains of her mother, Marlene K. Emerson, a 29-year-old woman, were found in the burned-down trailer. Now, June 27, 1997, Cassie's remains were found a year later in 1998. They were located 13 miles from the home. And during interrogation or whatever, Keyes only admitted that his first act of arson had been a trailer in Colville. And there's lots of other stuff that police think that he might be involved in since he lived in the area at different points in time. Now, he's a suspect in a series of crimes that happened in 2007 near Boca Raton, Florida. So the first one, Randy Ann Malitz Gorenberg, a 52-year-old woman, was kidnapped from the Boca Town Mall parking lot. Now, a short time later, her body was found near the South County Civic Center in Delray Beach, Florida, about 6 miles away. She had 2 fatal bullet wounds, and it seemed that she was taken by someone using her own vehicle, so she was kind of kidnapped and carnapped kind of thing. Now the second, a kidnapping of an unidentified woman that had claimed that her and her son were abducted from the same parking lot on August 7th, 2007. Now, the man wore a mask and dark sunglasses. He was tall and kind of athletic build to him. He had long hair, so it was pretty much the same ways that Keyes dressed when he was out stalking his victims. She was released unharmed after she withdrew cash from an ATM for the kidnapper. Now, the third crime, the murder of Nancy Bacciaccio, a 47-year-old, and her 7-year-old Joey Bacciaccio. I hope I said that right. They were found fatally shot at the Boca Town Center. But I don't think this was Keyes. Maybe the 2 out of 3 were. But Keyes lived by a code. So the third killing involving the child wouldn't have been Keyes, as he had a rule about children. More so, he had a bunch of rules that he followed. I'm just trying to remember them here. I know that he had some detailed rules that he followed when he would stalk and kill his victims. He'd plan things out well in advance, and he'd take the time to go over details, no matter how big or small. And he didn't kill twice in the same location. When on his murder trips, he would turn his cell phone off and he would pay with everything in cash. He also made sure the victims were unknown to him and that he had no ties to them. He did travel a lot to prepare for these murders when he felt the need to go out and kill. Like, for instance, like an example, like in the Courier's murder, Keyes flew to Chicago, and then he rented a car and he drove for over 1,000 miles to Vermont. And he used the murder kit that he buried there some 2 years earlier and committed the murder of the couple. And it's astounding how he could remember where all the buried supplies were even after like a few years. But soon enough, Keyes' fucked up desires had kind of overrode his rules for discipline. Now, after all his crimes, his rapes and killings, all this shit would soon come to light because he planned out a murder in Anchorage, Alaska, his hometown. Now, this would just get shit all over him. This murder would actually be Keyes' last confirmed victim, an 18-year-old woman named Samantha Theresa Koenig. Now, Keyes was looking for a place to plan an abduction, so he was thinking about some of the local coffee shops around town, how they would be sufficient enough. So he chose a place called Common Grounds, mainly because of its location, and it ran later hours than the other coffee shops. He never met Samantha before. He approached her at the counter just a little bit before closing time. He wore a ski mask, and he ordered a cup of coffee. She made him the coffee, she handed it back to him, and then he pulled out a gun and demanded money from the till. Samantha complied with his demands, and then he forced himself inside the coffee stand and bound her hands with some zip ties. He then asked her where her car was, and she told him that she didn't have a vehicle. This actually frustrated him, because he actually had to use his own vehicle as transportation. Now, he had officially broken one of the rules that he had set to follow, but kinda like after this whole abduction and murder thing, he'd surely break a couple more in the process. Keyes forced Samantha out of the coffee shop, and she ended up breaking free, but only for a moment. He ran after her and tackled her. He picked her back up, he put one arm around her, and the other hand pointed at her with the gun. Now, she started to cooperate with Keyes. They were now walking across the road into a nearby parking lot between an IHOP and a Dairy Queen establishment. This is where Keyes had parked his white pickup truck. Now, he had the truck prepared for the abduction. He took the mounted toolbox completely off. He removed the license plates. And he was just trying to get prepared. Now, he and Samantha got in the vehicle and they drove away. As he drove around town with Samantha in tow, he devised a plan that this was going to be a kidnap for ransom. Samantha told him that her family didn't have all that much money, and he would pretty much get nothing in ransom money. So, Keyes thought up the idea to raise the ransom by seeking the public's help, and he convinced her that if she fully cooperated, she would be returned to her family, totally unharmed. But the funny thing is that she believed him. Now, she tried numerous times to get him to release her, but he didn't have any luck. She didn't have any luck, sorry. Now, during the drive, Keyes had realized that she didn't have her cell phone on her, so he did a loop back to the coffee shop, and he needed her phone to be able to text in order to demand the ransom money. He left her bound in the truck, and then quickly ran into the coffee shop and got her cell phone. He hopped back in the truck, and they continued on. After driving for a bit, he pulled over and he sent 2 texts from Samantha's phone. The first text was to her boyfriend. The second text was to the owner of the coffee shop. The texts were sent kinda just to make it seem like she was having a shitty day and she was heading out of town for the weekend. Now, after Keyes sent the messages, he removed the battery from the phone. Keyes then demanded her debit card, but he found out that she shared a bank account with her boyfriend. I hope I say this right. It was Dwayne Tortolani II. And he had the ATM card in his truck, so they'd have to go over to their place and get it. She told him the address and the pin to the card. Keyes drove home first and put Samantha in the shed in the front of his house. He kept her bound, and he left her radio on just to drown out her cries for help or her screams or whatever. And he advised her before he left that he was in possession of a police scanner and would know if she attempted to alert the police or anybody else. So he got to the couple's place, and he grabbed the card from the truck. While there, he met her boyfriend, who kind of confronted him and started yelling at him, thinking he was like a robber. And, he got a weird text from Samantha, so he was on edge, right? Now, he yelled at him for a bit, but he ran back inside to get help. Now, this was the break that Keyes needed. So, he was pretty quick, and he left the scene before he could be found. He drove directly to the ATM just to try out the PIN number to see if it worked. And then he headed back to the shed to check up on his victim, Samantha. So, just reading through this case and shit, it kind of struck me a lot, I guess, but I get it, I guess. It said here that Keyes kind of had a glass of wine before he committed his crimes on Samantha. So, I just found that maybe he was just trying to relax or whatever, but I mean, it's not really like any of this shit really bothered him anyway. And when he entered the shed, Keyes finished up by telling her that, how he was going to rape and strangle her to death. So, he did that with the very rope that was around her neck. He then put the plan into motion, and he murdered her. He then left her in the shed and headed back to the house. And he wasn't even bothered by it, really, because he actually ended up packing for a trip, because he had a cruise planned. Now, this was pre-planned months prior, and he'd actually set out from New Orleans, and he left early the next morning on February 2nd, and he returned back to Anchorage on February 17th, 2012. So once he was back, he actually thought up his plans to write up the ransom note. Now, he wanted money to be placed into the account connected with the debit card, so he thought on his plans, and he retrieved Samantha's body. Now, he would try to make her seem like she was still alive, so he would take pictures and shit and send them to the family. So, he took pictures of her as she was tied up, and this showed Keyes' arm holding the local paper from February 13th, 2012. He then photocopied that photo and used a typewriter and started typing up a ransom demand for the amount of $30,000. He put this on the back of the photo, and he made sure everything was up to snuff. He then went to a place called Connor's Bog Park. Now, this was an unleashed dog park on the outskirts of Anchorage. And it has an extensive acreage and, just a huge forest and trails, right? Now, in the park, there was a memorial poster for a dog named Albert. He then texted the boyfriend from her phone, and he told him about the ransom note. And the ransom note was under Albert in the dog park. As Keyes waited around for a reply to the ransom note, Keyes dismembered Samantha's body. He drove out to Matanuska Lake, he cut a hole in the lake, and then he dumped her body. In the meantime, her father James had deposited the ransom money into the account, and it was just such an uproar throughout the community that everybody pulled together and they donated money for the ransom just to bring her home to safety. But little did they know that she was already dead. So police began to check out the ransom letter that was left at the dog park, so they hatched a plan. In order to catch him, they were going to track any withdrawals that were made from that account. And it started to work. The first withdrawal started to be withdrawn in Anchorage, and then New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas. So they ended up getting video surveillance from the bank, the vehicle that he drove while he was doing the withdrawals. And that was actually a white Ford Focus. So, I guess they finally had a solid lead, right? Now, FBI would team with Texas Rangers, and they began to track the ATM withdrawals as they occurred. So the heat kind of got turned up on old Keys there. So it was Corporal Brian Henry of the Texas Highway Patrol that saw the white Ford Focus. Keys was driving, and he pulled him over, and during the stop he gathered enough info to begin a search of the vehicle. Samantha's cell phone was found in the car, and the ATM card was actually found in Keys' wallet. So he was finally stopped, folks. I mean, not like he can deny any reason to be in possession of a missing girl's bank card. And his arrest was on March 14th, 2012. They also found cash that was stained with ink, so this indicated a dye pack from a bank robbery. And federal public defender Rich Kurtner, he represented him. Keys was indicted, and his trial was scheduled to start March 2013. Throughout his arrest and everything else, he did speak to numerous investigators for months. He cooperated with them to some extent anyway, and he confessed to some of his crimes. He also wanted to be executed within 1 year. The reason why he wanted a quick death or execution was to avoid publicity due to the negative attention that his young daughter might face. He didn't want her knowing anything about him or have any backlash towards her for the shit that he did. Now, as soon as media started talking about his identity, he stopped participating with the investigators. I'll fast forward to May 23rd, 2012. He then attempted an escape during a hearing. He used wood shavings from a pencil to pick the lock on his own cuffs. It didn't last long because then he was tased by U.S. Marshals. Now, while being held in jail, this was at Anchorage Correctional Complex, somehow Keys snuck in a razor blade in his cell, and he was rejected from using this. There were restrictions and shit, but he slipped it in. Keys committed suicide on December 2nd, 2012, by cutting his wrists. I mean, also he had he tried to do some strangulation stuff, but it was just a shitty attempt. He left all of his secrets behind, and now his victims' families, they'll never know what happened. They'll get to think about this stuff probably, ongoing. And he also left a suicide note behind, and it was found underneath his body. It kind of offered it didn't offer any clues or anything to any possible victims, but there was a drawing of 11 skulls in a pentagram that were drawn in blood under his jail cell bed. One of the phrases written was, "We are one." So FBI kind of believes that the skulls represent the total number of victims by Keys, although police were only able to tie him to 9 victims, including Samantha, the Couriers, and Deborah Feldman. And I guess that's it, folks. That's all I can tell you on Keys here. I mean, I can probably keep going with a little bit here. And even though he was a very odd yet calculated serial killer, he did put the time in. And I know he caused a lot of terror and sadness along the way. And there is other aspects that we can discuss too, like his neighbors when he lived off the grid. Chevy O'Brien Keogh. And he was also an American convicted murderer. And he grew up with him and his brother. They befriended Keys, so they hung out a lot. And eventually, he would actually start hanging out with the Chevy brothers. Even around the time when they all congregated at the white supremacist church when they were in the slums, the 2 brothers and the father, they were in the midst of planning a race war. And the 2 brothers knew all about guns. They dabbled in the black market. Selling this kind of shit was up Keys' alley anyway. And this is always why he would have guns around to sell, because he acquired them from stealing and breaking into houses. They also showed him things like how to build a pipe bomb. And he was good at that. And one time he blew the gate off of a Forest Service gate. So the guy learned stuff from like the criminal aspect of things and the army side of things. So it was like he had the good and the bad. But, he thought about all those options, and obviously he chose bad, right? So, and even though, like, he grew up poor, like, he did pretty much build everything up that he wanted to. It was just his crazy sporadic urges that he wanted to kill. And I guarantee there's more victims from Keyes out there, but his secrets died with him. And even the Chevy brothers, like, how they were his neighbors, like, I'll do an episode on that one day too. Because, there's a lot of details in these guys' lives that we could all talk about here soon enough. Like, what else could there be in this case too? Like, I know the police had, they thought that Samantha's father was actually a suspect in this, during the whole money transfer thing. I can touch base on that here in a sec. During the investigation, police kind of shifted their focus towards Samantha's father. It just seemed that police thought that he knew more than what he was letting on, and could possibly be involved in his daughter's kidnapping. So police dug a little deeper, and they noticed that he hung around with a bad crowd of criminals, and that he owed money to at least one drug dealer. Not a big deal, so the guy had a sketchy bit of a past. Everybody has those, right? Now, once it got around to him that he was a primary suspect, he cut off speaking with investigators. And this was only until March 9th, 2012, because police got word that Samantha's bank account was being used to make withdrawals in Texas. So this then in turn eliminated them from being potential suspects. There's also a little thing here, just a little time after his daughter's murder, James had gotten himself in some trouble. He was arrested for drunken driving and an assault. As the investigation kicked off, he was accused of driving away from a strip club while drunk. He threatened the doorman when he tried to stop him from getting in his vehicle, and then police caught up with him at his home. James denied threatening the bouncer, and then he refused a breathalyzer. He did decline a comment to the media after he posted bail. Sometimes people, I guess they grieve different, right? So I hope this all works out for him in the end. And like even Israel Keyes, like his dad, John Jeffrey Keyes, like he died November 13th, 2002. So he didn't really get to see the monster that his son had become, which is probably a good thing. And I hope this episode was like as enjoyable for you guys as it was for me. And I'm just trying to think if I can remember anything to add quickly. Like, I know with all the traveling that he did, like, he would purchase fucking plane tickets and then rent a car and then drive to where his kill kits were, right? And then just murder at random. Like, one rental car he had, it was a blue 2011 Kia Soul. That was rented by Keyes from February 2nd to the 7th of 2012. And he drove the vehicle for 2,847 miles. And, like, in Canadian kilometers, that's 4,581 kilometers. Like, like I said, like, that was dedication. And that's all I got for you folks. I'm sure there's some more out there. And I hope that, I gave you guys this episode to my awesome viewers the best I could. And even with my research and clips and shit, like, I try to get the information out there. So, you guys rock, and honestly, thanks for keeping me going on the episodes. Now, I'll try to get a case out to you guys here, like, every Tuesday and Saturday. Maybe something in between. It's just work's been picking up a little bit more, and it'll be wintertime here soon, so I'm gonna be busy, so I will keep putting out episodes, and thank you very much for all your time, guys. Take her easy.
Casually holding a cup of coffee, serial killer Israel Keys is at times seen smiling in 2012 FBI interrogation videos as he described or alluded to killing 11 people. Investigators now believe 48-year-old Deborah Feldman may have been one of his victims after his reaction to seeing her picture.
One of the photos that he was shown was a photo of Deborah Feldman. And when he got to that photograph, he made the statement that he didn't want to talk about that.
I was out looking for trouble. I had that place up there staked out on actually 2 or 3 nights. And then I had a park, a couple of parks here in town that I could ride my bike to. I had those staked out. And yeah, but there's still a couple gallons of Drano and a shovel stashed up there.
Something like Highland Road?
No, I don't know if it's Highland Road. It's the one that goes up to the North Fork Eagle River. You take the road that goes right by the Walmart, and you just keep following that. Yeah. You drive up that, and then off to the right, there's a gated parking area. There's like some restrooms. There's like an outhouse down there, and I had that place set up for a while. I had a bag stashed in the bushes there with all my stuff in it, and a cutoff tool, battery-powered cutoff tool, and a padlock. The plan there was I had that parking lot staked out. Somebody after, like pretty late. I was going to take them and use the cutoff tool to lock the gate, and then do my thing there in the parking lot. And then I had the Drano and the shovel stocked up there as a way to get rid of the body if I needed it. So.
But that never happened?
No.
As the FBI releases new information about a confessed serial killer, there are lots of questions about his time spent in Canada. Investigators believe that Israel Keys may have killed up to 11 people across the U.S. and perhaps in Canada as well.
In interrogation after interrogation, Israel Keys toyed with authorities.
Additional charges?
Still, investigators were able to glean some information about the confessed killer and his travels. Keys crisscrossed the continent from 2001 to 2012. Financial records show he stayed at this Victoria hotel in April 2006. He even rented a boat during his time in the capital. Then, a year later, Keys spent time in Cache Creek on his way to Alaska. One of the officers who interrogated him says it's unlikely Keys murdered anyone on such well-documented trips, but the FBI can't be sure because of what Keys said when talking about potential victims.
And when we got to Canada, he made a joke that said Canadians don't count. I did take that to be a joke, that he really wasn't responsible for something in Canada. However, with the trip in, especially in 2006, anything's possible with him.
With Keys now dead, the FBI is turning to the public for help.
We're getting tons of leads coming in right now. We're starting to sift through the leads that we have. This is the most detail that I've ever seen put out in an investigation.
The problem is it's not easy to track down missing persons, especially across borders.
If a person from Washington went to British Columbia on a trip, and they actually went missing from British Columbia, it would be Washington that reported them missing.
The FBI says it will follow up on all of the leads pouring in, but for now, investigators have very little concrete information. And the BC RCMP and the Victoria Police Department say they've not yet been contacted to help.
The FBI released the suicide note of an Alaska serial killer today. Israel Keys was awaiting trial for the murder of an Anchorage barista when he was found dead in his cell this past December. He had slit his wrist with a disposable razor. During the investigation, Keys told police he had murdered people across the U.S., including 4 people in Washington, but didn't name names. The note did not identify any new victims, but included poetry about violence.
Twisted Tales.